Despite a few close calls on the runways and in the skies above U.S. airports recently, commercial air travel has never been safer in history than it is today. However, that wasn't always the case. When climbing aboard a commercial aircraft used to be a potential risk for passengers. And this wasn't that long ago either. As recent as the 1980s and early 90s, it seemed like there was almost one commercial airline crash, at least once a week in the US and around the world. Nevertheless, people lost in past aviation accidents didn't do so in vain, because every major commercial aviation accident that occurred in the past contributed to the aviation safety measures we now take for granted. So I thought it would be a good idea to take a look back on some of the major air crashes that made aviation safer for the flying public today. That's next on Maximus. Greetings everybody, Maximus here. Really quick before we get to my list. I know many of you will have different lists in your minds because there really are an infinite number of crashes we could talk about. So I hope that you will share all of them with me in the comment section. I'm looking forward to many hundreds of comments on this one. But this is my list of what I consider just some of the biggest steps forward in aviation innovation learned from disasters in the past. Oh, and you will notice I didn't include the Boeing MAX crashes in this list because frankly they were man-made and criminal, so they go into a category all to themselves. So with that, let's start the list. Number 12. The de Havilland Comet. The de Havilland Comet was the world's first commercial jet airliner, created and manufactured by de Havilland in the United Kingdom. In 1949, the Comet 1 prototype completed its first flight. However, within a year of entering airline service, issues arose, with 3 Comets being involved in highly publicized accidents, resulting in catastrophic in-flight breakups. Investigations would later reveal that 2 of these accidents were caused by metal fatigue in the airframe, a phenomenon not fully understood at the time, while the other was due to overstressing during flights through severe weather. Despite extensive redesigns, including structural reinforcements, the Comet struggled to regain its former success. However, rival manufacturers, particularly Boeing, learned valuable lessons from the Comet's mistakes, which contributed to the success and dominance of the great Boeing 707 in the new jet age. As a side note, it was the Comet crashes that got the aviation industry talking about the need to create data and cockpit voice recorders for commercial aircraft. In the early 1960s, flight and data recorders became mandatory for all commercial aircraft. Number 11. The Grand Canyon TWA Flight 2 and United Airlines Flight 178 mid-air collision. On June 30, 1956, TWA Flight 2, a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, and United Flight 718, a DC-7, on different sightseeing tours, collided above the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Sadly, all 128 passengers and crew on board both flights lost their lives. However, it was this tragic event that prompted a $250 million upgrade of the air traffic control system. And that wasn't chump change back in 1956, as that equates to $2.4 billion in today's money. As a result of this accident in 1958, this also led to major changes in the then Federal Aviation Agency, or as we call it today, the Federal Aviation Administration. Number 10. TCAS. Although TCAS, or Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, is the only entry on my list that wasn't an actual airplane crash, it is still a vital part of today's aviation safety, because 3 decades after the Grand Canyon mid-air collisions were still claiming lives. However, now it was more frequently occurring with small civilian aircraft colliding with larger commercial aircraft. One of the most infamous of these collisions happened in my hometown of San Diego in 1978, when a PSA 727 shuttling PSA employees was on final approach to San Diego Lindbergh Field when it collided with a Cessna 172, claiming the lives of all 135 on board both aircraft and 7 people on the ground. But in the 70s, TCAS was still in development and not available for aircraft. Then finally, as the improved TCAS-1 was ready, it was installed on selected commercial aircraft starting in 1981. However, it wasn't until an almost identical mid-air collision in 1986 over the LA suburb of Cerritos, California, when an Aeromexico 727 collided with a Piper Cherokee, also on final approach, which also claimed the lives of all 82 on board both aircraft and 15 on the ground, that the FAA finally mandated that all commercial aircraft be fitted with the new and improved TCAS-2, which not only detected potential collisions with other transponder-equipped aircraft, but audibly advised pilots to climb or dive in response to a pending collision.
Traffic.
TCAS, I have control.
Since then, no small plane has collided with a major airline in flight in the U.S. Number 9. Delta Airlines Flight 191. On August 2, 1985, Delta Flight 191 crashed during landing at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport due to wind shear caused by a nearby violent thunderstorm. The plane lost 54 knots of airspeed while being forced to the ground by wind shear. Before reaching the runway, the plane bounced off a highway, killing the driver of a vehicle before missing the runway and veering to the left and crashing into 2 huge airport water tanks, tearing the plane apart. 134 of 163 people on board did not survive. This tragedy spurred a 7-year research effort by NASA and the FAA, resulting in the implementation of onboard forward-looking Doppler radar and wind shear detectors as standard equipment on airliners in the mid-1990s. Only one wind shear-related accident has occurred since. Number 8. Maui, Hawaii Aloha Airlines Flight 243. On April 28, 1988, as Aloha Flight 243, a deteriorated and fatigued 19-year-old Boeing 737 on a short jump from Hilo to Honolulu just leveled off at 24,000 feet. Without warning, a large section of the top of its fuselage ripped off, leaving dozens of passengers suddenly riding in open-air 300-mile-per-hour winds. Miraculously, the rest of the plane held together long enough for the pilots to land safely. Only one person, a flight attendant who was swept out of the plane, sadly lost her life. The following NTSB investigation blamed a combination of corrosion and widespread fatigue damage, the result of repeated pressurization cycles during the plane's 89,000-plus flights. In response, the FAA began the National Aging Aircraft Research Program in 1991, which tightened inspection and maintenance requirements for high-use and high-cycle aircraft. Number 7. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, U.S. Airways Flight 427. When U.S. Airways Flight 427 began its approach to land in Pittsburgh on September 8, 1994, the Boeing 737 suddenly rolled to the left and plunged 5,000 feet to the ground, claiming all 132 lives on board. The plane's black box revealed the rudder had abruptly moved to the full left position, triggering the uncommanded roll. But why? U.S. Air blamed the plane while Boeing blamed the crew. It took nearly 5 years for the NTSB to conclude that a jammed valve in the rudder control system had caused the rudder to reverse direction. As the pilots frantically pressed on the right rudder pedal, the rudder would only turn left, which caused the 737 to quickly roll and nosedive into the ground. As a result, Boeing spent $500 million to retrofit all 2,800 of their 737s, the world's most popular aircraft. Additionally, this same problem was also determined to have been the cause of United Airlines 737 crash 585 in Denver 3 years earlier in 1991. Number 6. Cincinnati, Ohio, Air Canada Flight 797. On June 2, 1983, at 33,000 feet during cruise flight, smoke began pouring out of the rear lavatory. Soon, thick black smoke enveloped the cabin. The pilots immediately began to put the plane into an emergency descent. Barely able to see the instrument panel due to smoke, the pilots managed to safely land the plane in Cincinnati. Sadly though, shortly after the doors and emergency exits were opened, the sudden rush of oxygen caused the cabin to erupt in a flash fire before everyone could get out. Of the 46 on board the Air Canada DC-9, 23 did not survive the smoke and fire. The FAA subsequently mandated that aircraft lavatories be equipped with smoke detectors and automatic fire extinguishers. Additionally, within 5 years, all jetliners were retrofitted with fire-blocking layers on seat cushions and floor lighting to lead passengers crawling on the floor to find the exits in dense smoke. Number 5. Miami, Florida Valujet Flight 592. Following the tragic Air Canada accident in 1983, the FAA implemented safety measures to prevent cabin fires. However, they failed to address cargo compartments, despite NTSB warnings after a 1988 cargo fire that resulted, fortunately, in a safe landing. It wasn't until the devastating crash of Valujet 592 in the Everglades on May 11, 1996, that the agency took action. Sabertech, the airline's maintenance contractor, had illegally packaged chemical oxygen generators, which caused a fire when one was accidentally triggered by movement in the cargo hold. The escaping pure oxygen fed the fire, which spread rapidly, and the pilots were unable to land in time, resulting in 110 fatalities. To prevent future tragedies, the FAA mandated smoke detectors and automatic fire extinguishers in all commercial airline cargo holds and strengthened rules against carrying hazardous cargo on aircraft. Number 4. Alaska Airlines Flight 261. On January 31, 2000, roughly 2.7 miles north of Anacapa Island west of LAX above the Pacific Ocean, following a catastrophic loss of pitch control, the McDonnell Douglas MD-83 inverted and nosedived into the Pacific Ocean, claiming all 88 lives on board. NTSB board member John J. Goglia's statement for the final report, along with 3 other board members, concluded that the crash was a maintenance accident pure and simple. Alaska Airlines maintenance inspection, and especially lack of proper basic periodic required lubrication of its horizontal stabilizer activation system, were poorly conceived and woefully executed. The failure was compounded by poor Alaska Air and FAA oversight, Goglia said. He said had any of the managers, mechanics, inspectors, supervisors, or especially the FAA whose job it was to oversee and protect this mechanism had done their job conscientiously, this accident would never have happened. The NTSB made several specific maintenance recommendations to assure this type of accident never happens again. Number 3. Long Island, New York, TWA Flight 800. The explosion of TWA Flight 800 on July 17, 1996 was a horrific accident that claimed all 230 people on board and baffled investigators. The Boeing 747 had just taken off from JFK Airport and was en route to Paris when it exploded in mid-air at low altitude over the Atlantic Ocean. The incident sparked a great deal of controversy and fear that it was a terrorist attack. However, after careful examination of the wreckage, the NTSB dismissed the possibility of a terrorist attack and concluded that fumes in the center wing fuel tank, which was nearly empty at the time, had ignited due to a spark in the fuel gauge sensor caused by a short circuit in a wire bundle. In response, the FAA mandated changes to fuel tank wiring to reduce the chance of sparks from faulty wiring and other sources. Boeing also developed a fuel inerting system that injects nitrogen gas into the fuel tanks to lower the risk of igniting the fuel. The system was also installed in all newly built Boeing planes, and retrofit kits were made available for existing planes at the time. Number 2. The Canary Islands, Tenerife. March 27, 1977. KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736 This crash remains the deadliest ever, claiming the lives of 583 people when two 747s collided on a foggy runway on the island of Tenerife in the Canary Islands. It occurred after a series of miscommunications between the two flight crews and air traffic control. After Tenerife, officials made sweeping changes to international airline regulations, requiring that all control towers and flight crews worldwide use standard English phrases. Also, cockpit procedures were modified so that the hierarchy among crew members was de-emphasized, and decision-making by mutual agreement of the entire crew, not just the captain, was the new rule. Now it's no longer just a suggestion, but a requirement that if the first officer disagrees with the captain, especially if there is a danger to the passengers and crew, that the first officer must speak up and tell the captain. Known in the industry as crew resource management after Tenerife, this rule became a standard worldwide. I made an in-depth video on this crash, and I'll include a link in the description down below. And finally, number 1. The 9/11 attacks. The hijacking and subsequent terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 took the lives of 2,977 people on the planes, in the Twin Towers, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. And this makes number 1 on my list for the simple reason because sadly this entire disaster that played out on live TV for all the world to see was 100% completely avoidable. Because for years the world's airlines already had the blueprint to stop this type of catastrophe from happening. Because Israeli airlines have been locking their cockpit doors for the very same reason of terrorism and hijacking for 30 years, even before 9/11 beginning in 1970. And as a result of the painful lessons learned from 9/11-2001, by adding locks to the cockpit doors along with other major security measures, there has never been another hijacking on U.S. soil. So there you have it. That's my top 12 aviation disasters in history that have made flying the safest form of transportation in the world. But like I said earlier, there are so many more. Do you agree with my list? Do you have your own list? The number 1 metric that YouTube algorithm uses to promote videos to more people is comments. So do me a favor, get down there and light it up. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for now. Please be sure to subscribe if you think I've earned it. Don't forget to like, share, and ring the bell. And remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.